Yeah, let's start. Thank you very much for joining, like the presentation. Small people, I think that people will join later. The presentation is titled Platform Engineering on Kubernetes. The main reason that I'm here, I think it's because I wrote a book with that title. And basically, in this session, which is a very strange session for me to do, I will be sharing a little bit about like the lessons learned while doing kind of like the writing of the book and just collaborating in different open source projects. So that's the book. If you're interested, you can check it out. My name is Mauricio Salatino. I work for a company that is called Diagrid, and I've been working on open source for more than 10 years. And I've been lucky enough to have companies paying me for doing so, which is kind of interesting. It's not impossible. You can do it if you want to, but you need to find your way around the community. Having said this, the company that I'm in right now, Diagrid, is just a small startup. We are working behind an open source project, and I will cover that in a bit. So the presentation is divided into three different sections that I wanted to touch on today, but I wrote a long blog post about this, which I think it's good if you're interested in contributing to open source and you know, learning from someone who have been doing this for long and sometimes, you know, never had the time to actually write down, you know, some important things that you need to do when you work in these kind of like projects. So I will start with the first one, which is connecting the dots, I want to talk about like the same thing that the keynote before talked about, which is, you know, navigating the ecosystem. Again, this is a meme already, like it's too complicated, and for experts, this is still complicated. For new people, this is kind of like impossible. We know that most of the projects around the CNCF space are Kubernetes related. That's a good thing. But what we don't know is that mapping these different projects to different problems that you will face when you're adopting Kubernetes is not that easy, and it takes time. And it just takes time. So you just need to spend a lot of time doing research and putting people to research these different projects to see if they are going to help or not. I've heard this before. Sometimes it's easier to build your own solutions. I know very, very large companies that say, you know, I will adopt Kubernetes and then I will build my own controllers for doing everything. And that's a very complicated journey. So sometimes looking into the landscape, it's the best alternative to get started and to get something up and running fast. But I wanted to discuss a little bit about like the tools in this space and some of the things that I found after using these tools for more than 5 years. So I have kind of like this section about like ecosystem challenges and things that I didn't know when I started, which I think it's kind of like important, like 5 or 6 years ago when I started with Kubernetes. I didn't thought about this that much. Today, I actually think about these things a lot when I think about adopting open source projects. So the first thing, which is a very implicit thing that it's for every project that you will find, is that every tool that you find in the CNCF landscape or any piece of software actually is built with a use case or a set of use cases in mind, right? Thinking that those use cases that were used to design these tools are going to map to your company specific use cases, it's a big ask because probably where that tool was developed, it was completely different industry, probably a completely different set of problems. So you need to go there to look into these projects with the assumption that you will need to change them or you will need to heavily configure them to do what they are supposed to do for your specific use case. So for me, open source, it's really, really good because it will solve 80% of the things that you need to solve, but that extra 20%, it's on you. So you need to know and plan for that in advance. Another thing that is implicit in the CNCF landscape is that, okay, we know that these projects are Kubernetes related, so we think that they will work together. Well, guess what? 2 or 3 years ago, if you put like 3 or 4 projects together, it was kind of like quite a lot of work to make it work together. And it takes time again. You need to actually understand how these projects were designed and then how they are going to work together for whatever you are trying to use them. And then again, like understanding what project does what and how it was designed to achieve that mission, it's hard and it takes time. And usually you need to put someone to do kind of like deep research in understanding the internals of the project. So it's good. It's getting better, right? Like the ecosystem nowadays is way much better than 4 years ago where things were evolving really, really fast. And now it's reaching to a state of maturity, which it's kind of interesting to see, right? In a way, it's getting a little bit more boring because now it's easier to adopt and they are kind of like way much more stable. So that you don't have kind of like that innovation pace, but it's much easier to adopt and to use in everyday things. So for the book, I created this example that it's there in that GitHub repository, and I have Matthias here in the audience that helped me with these examples. And basically, I used two projects: one Crossplane, another one bCluster. How many of you know Crossplane, guys? Yeah, so you have some people there. Yeah, it's a very popular project nowadays. When I started kind of like using it 2.5 years ago, it was very good, but very unstable, and everything changed all the time. The same with bCluster. How many people know bCluster? Yeah, some folks here are using it. Great. And basically what I try to do with this example is to show how to combine them, and at the same time, how to abstract them away from the users that are going to choose these tools, right? Asking someone to learn about Crossplane can take a while, and the same with bCluster. So the main objective of this example is to show not a hello world, but a combination of tools that you can expose to users without understanding any of these tools, which I think it's kind of like important. Crossplane, for those one that doesn't know about Crossplane, is a project that allows you to create cloud resources by using the Kubernetes APIs. So you send, like a YAML file to a cluster, and then a database gets created on Google Cloud. And bCluster, on the other hand, allows you to create virtual clusters, so smaller clusters inside kind of like big clusters, basically. And that's you usually do that for isolation purposes, right? Like you want to give different teams different clusters. So the scenario that I created here is creating development environments with these two tools, but what I'm going to show you now doesn't involve any of these tools at all, right? Like that's the whole idea. So what I wanted to show here is that I have here a YAML file, of course, because this is Kubernetes, that basically represents a development environment. Right, so this is just a new resource that I've created, and I didn't create any new controller or created any Kubernetes extension. I just used Crossplane and bCluster to implement these, but it's just configuration and wiring things together. So in this case, I have an environment type that I can send to my cluster, and my cluster will provision this environment for me. Right, I have a selector here. This is kind of like an interface, right? Like I have different implementations for different types of environments, and I have parameters to configure what these environments are going to have inside when I create a new instance. So if you let me do that, just apply this. That's fine. Yeah. That wasn't the idea. Yeah, that's fine. So basically, I've applied everything that I had there in the directory. I didn't want it to do that, but maybe that's kind of like a good thing. So what I did there, I just applied a bunch of environments into my cluster, and now Crossplane and bCluster are going to create these environments for me. Because they are like Kubernetes resources, I can just query them as well, right? Let's check them out. So you can see here that I have two environments being created right now, and they are being provisioned. And as you can see here, they are not ready yet. It will take like a minute or so to create this environment in my local machine. But again, this environment will be provisioned using bCluster. So at the end of the day, what I will have is a connection string to connect to a new cluster that it's completely independent from the cluster that I'm using to create the environments. The good thing about Crossplane is that you can do the same and change, let's say that you want to create like a staging or a testing environment and not use bCluster. You can create a real cluster in Google Cloud or in AWS or wherever you want using exactly the same kind of like YAML file that I show you here, right? So something similar, but instead of type development, you put like type testing, and then you have a different configuration for that environment. It can be creating resources on the cloud anywhere you want. So that's kind of like the first thing. I can wait for the environment to be up and show you how to connect and all that stuff, but it's besides the point of the presentation. Of course, because this is like included in the book, you can check it there, like in that GitHub repository, and you can run the same example in your computer if you're interested in doing so. So some tips around navigating the ecosystem. I think that like if you are here like in KCD, I think that you know how to work with the ecosystem, you know how to evaluate tools. But for me, it's really important because I keep seeing different companies like looking into maybe single tools or tools that are popular right now, and they're just trying to push that into their teams. And that's usually good, but you need to understand that you're actually pushing for cultural changes just to change the way of doing things. And sometimes that takes a lot of time. So scoping down the problem, it's really important. Getting hands-on experience, it's also really important with these tools that are complex. It's really good when you can try them out and see how they work and see how they react when you try to integrate that with other projects and with the projects that you're already using. check for case studies. In the CNCF, they publish a lot of case studies, and it's pretty kind of like good to see what other companies are doing and how they are doing and how they are using open source projects. Understanding what projects gets combined more often will basically help you to adopt them pretty easily, to just see what other people is using, and you can just start using them as well. Keep an open mind. Again, just do not follow the hypes. Tools get popular every 2 years, and try to see for simple tools that provide interfaces, that provide good documentation, and that they have like very good communities. In practice, take a look at this repository platform on Gates in GitHub under my account. There is an issue there for translating all the tutorials into Portuguese. If you want to contribute with that, that will be great, because it will help other people to, actually do these tutorials in Portuguese. It's already translated into Chinese, it's in English, and we have some chapters in Portuguese as well. The second thing that it's really important is working with people. Like we saw it in the keynote, like people, communities, contributors, individual contributors, and not only company contributors are important. Making connections, if you want to navigate the open source space, having friends into different projects is really, really important, and it can speed you up like a lot, right? Like if you're working on a company that it's adopting open source projects, get out there, meet maintainers. Your journey in the open source and the adoption of the projects is much easier in that way. You need to be prepared to be collaborating with people from all around the world. And I can see that like Brazil is very high on the list of contributors, so you are doing it right there, definitely. And then understand that people working on open source most of the time are working for companies, right? If like the project is popular, you will have companies involved. So understanding the company's motivations and goals behind the open source projects, again, can help you to protect your time investment, right? Like if you're spending time on an open source project and you understand what the company behind that open source project is planning to do, you should look into that and use that into your advantage. Things that I didn't know when I started. Yes, some people create open source projects for fun. Those are hobbies in general. When you start seeing companies behind open source projects, those are commercially valid projects that are going to be maintained by these companies. People will pay money for maintainers to work on these projects, and that's a very good way to get into, working on open source 24/7. Understanding why these companies are putting money in these projects, again, will help you to save time, and it will help you to see if this project is going to be viable in a couple of years, right? If you're adopting any project and you don't know if this project is going to die in the next 2 years, you might be wasting your time. So it's kind of like interesting to see what the companies behind the projects are doing. I worked for some companies where they didn't know what they were doing with the open source projects, or maybe somebody knew, but not everyone involved knew. So it's important to figure out if companies actually know where the project is going and pushing the project in a direction that you are aligned with. Because if you are not aligned, then what's the point? Something that I didn't know and I didn't do for a long time, at least for 5 years when I started my open source journey, mostly in the Java space, not in the cloud space, was not engaging with companies. I strongly recommend you to engage with companies behind open source projects. You have a lot of sponsors here. You need to understand why they are here, what are they doing, and provide feedback, right? Like if you're using an open source project and it's not working or it's not doing the thing that you're supposed to do with the project, not only get in touch with the community around the project, but also with the company sponsoring. That's gold for the companies, but you are going to get a lot from that kind of interactions. Providing feedback is kind of like a very, very important thing. If you do it with companies, again, it's going to get you a lot of friends in that space. That's why KCDs, having sponsors and going to KubeCons is also extremely important. If you have the possibility to go to any KubeCon, I strongly recommend to do so. You get an advantage of understanding what companies are doing. Like you can actually see 2 years ahead in time. That's extremely important. For this space, like talking about people, I wanted to mention a couple of things that I did for the book. I work with people from IBM in the Tecton community. Tecton, how many people knows Tecton? Yeah, good. Like some folks here, it's like a project for building pipelines inside Kubernetes. So you create a lot of YAML files to define these pipelines and to execute different tasks. It's a really nice project for platform builders because you can create collections of tasks that you can share, and these pipelines will run inside the cluster. I wrote that section. I was very into this, and I thought, okay, my book is about Kubernetes, so covering Tecton is the right thing. But I started getting a lot of feedback about comparing this with GitHub Actions, for example, right? Which is very and massively adopted. Like everybody knows how to use GitHub Actions. Most open source projects are using them, using GitHub Actions to run, pipelines and all that stuff. And of course, I created an example with GitHub Actions, and it was pretty interesting because, you have the very Kubernetes way of doing things. You have the very remote cloud way of doing things, where you run your pipelines only, in GitHub or Azure Cloud or whatever. But what started bothering me about this is like there's a very, very high barrier on the things that you need to have, right? Like you need to depend on remote compute to run your pipelines, or you need to have a Kubernetes cluster and understand how to configure Tecton. And because I knew people in Microsoft and I knew people in IBM and different communities, they introduced me via friends to like the Dagger community. Dagger is a project that is founded by people from Docker. The people that created Docker at the beginning created Dagger. And it's basically a pipeline engine that allows you to write pipelines that will run in the same way no matter the environment. So you can run something like GitHub Actions locally in GitHub Actions or in Kubernetes clusters. It's a very, very powerful project. It's gaining a lot of momentum right now. So if you haven't looked into this, please check it out. For the book, I was using a very, very early version. And what I want to show here is that I think that they have figured out a couple of important things about like caching, right? So I can run a pipeline. So here I'm running a pipeline written in Go. You can just write pipelines in any language that you want. And this pipeline is basically building a container image and publishing it to Docker Hub and doing a bunch of other things like running tests and things. But because I haven't changed, the source code of the service itself, everything is cached, right? Like the caching layer here, it's really amazing. It actually checks the SHAs in Docker Hub, so if it doesn't need to push anything, it will not ever try to push anything. So that's the pipeline, and yeah, again, because it's written in Go or in Java or in .NET or in Python or in Node or whatever you want to use, the pipeline is pretty much code, right? Like this is just the description of the stages, and basically what Dagger does is separate every stage in the pipeline, every goal that you have, into a container that will run in isolation. That, again, pretty amazing thing that I just get to know because I have friends in different companies that do these things. And actually, I think that by having and understanding all these different options, then when you need to make a decision, you have a very well-informed, set of information that will guide you through it. So some tips here, again, provide feedback. It's really important. If you're engaging with, if you are consuming open source, provide feedback to the open source communities. For me, at this point, it's more important to provide feedback to companies that are building stuff on top of open source. Companies are not evil. They are just building stuff for you to use. If you are like in a production, kind of like a scenario, they are trying to make your life easier. Go to conferences. We know that. And don't be shy, make new friends. It's really important. Again, sometimes the language barrier, it's difficult to go through, but people is more than willing to accept that, like, we can do it in English, we can do it in Spanish, we can try whatever just to make sure that we have communication and we create, more friends and more community. And just because of that, I wanted to ask you, this will mean a lot. Like if you can take a look at the products that we're building. Again, we are not trying to sell anything in here. They are like mostly free services, one for developers and the other one for Kubernetes users. And just, again, engaging in feedback with companies like mine, that it's like 20 people company, it means a lot. It actually means a lot. It just validates that what we are doing makes any sense for you folks. I know that I'm in a Kubernetes community, conference, so I think that these products will make a lot of sense to you folks. And finally, dealing with change. I don't know how much time do I have. I think that I have 10 more minutes. This is kind of like important. Again, like change is a feature. It's not an edge case. Things will change. When I was writing the book, actually, because it took me almost like 2 years to write this book, I think that I dropped like 4 chapters because the tools that I was mentioning in those chapters were not longer existent, which is kind of funny. In the span of 2 years, tools completely disappeared, or tools completely changed direction completely in a way that I couldn't use that tool to do the thing that I was supposed to do with that tool anymore. That for me was a bit very challenging, because then you start thinking, okay, I will never finish this book if I need to drop 4 chapters and write new 4 chapters. But actually, that experience helped me a lot to understand how to manage that kind of change in the context of writing a book, which actually applies on how do you manage change in general in software, right? Having the right interfaces, I think that makes a lot of sense. How do you write? How do you create these interfaces between the projects? It's kind of like an important lesson learned for me, at least. And understanding that if you have your interfaces and your interfaces are stable, you should be able to swap tools without affecting any teams using those tools. And again, that sounds very nice when you say it, but like the implementation of that, it takes quite some time to get it right. Another thing that is related to that, that I've been, again, learning for the last 2 years, I think, since I'm started working with Dapper, is the idea of delaying decisions that enable applications to be, truly independent from their environment. With Kubernetes, we managed to run applications, run workloads across cloud providers pretty easily, right? Like we create a container, and that container will run in different providers, no problem there. But how these containers communicate with their environment, with the available services in different cloud providers, that's not something that we have managed to solve quite right yet. But that's why, like Crossplane, the project that I mentioned before, that allows you to create, cloud resources across cloud providers, it's a very important step forward. And I think that Dapper complements that vision by providing developers the right APIs to build applications that can interact with different environments. And I will be talking about Dapper in a bit. I wrote a blog post there in the Crossplane blog about like Crossplane and Dapper working together and why they complement each other. So if you're interested in that, and if you know Crossplane, I strongly recommend you to check that blog post too. Things that I didn't know when I started this journey is that, like, again, as an application developer, right? Like when you choose a cloud provider or a database or a message broker, you're getting married with those decisions. And those decisions are very, very difficult to change later on, right? Like if you selected a database and you want to change, then you need to not only change the technical aspect of it, but the cultural aspect of teams working with that specific database or that specific cloud provider. When you join a cloud provider, of course, you get tied to all their services, and it's very difficult to get out. Kubernetes, again, is one step forward in the right direction, but it's still, there is a lot of work to do there. And things, common issues that you will find there, right? Like, testing cloud services in local environments is hard. There are tools, but it's hard. It's like you need to jump into that idea of developing all your applications in a remote way, or not having some kind of hybrid where you do some things locally and test things in different environments. So you need to kind of like figure out your way around that. Testing cloud locally might be complicated. And then again, like a common question nowadays is that, having local Kubernetes clusters, is that the right way? Or maybe it's not. Like, I'm not entirely sure. I've seen both, right? Like people saying our developers will never need to learn about Kubernetes, or our developers needs to use a local Kubernetes cluster to run integration tests at least, because if not, like things will not work. And I think that that's why Dapper, which is not a very well-known project into the CNCF, I think it's really important. This project was created in 2019 by Microsoft, and it's actually very active in the community. The main idea behind Dapper is to abstract away infrastructure from application code. So Dapper provides you APIs to interact with message brokers, databases, do kind of like cross-cutting concerns, so applications can be moved across environments. That's the main point of Dapper. It's a very vibrant project. It has 23,000 stars, which I don't even care. I don't even know what that means, but I think that it's a good number. But what I'm interested in more is that like 12th position in the top growing projects into the CNCF landscape. I didn't imagine that in any way or form, but when you look at the stats of the repositories, the amount of pull requests that we get like every week, it's kind of crazy. I went to KubeCon China last year, and seeing the Chinese government using Dapper for their workloads was kind of like completely mind-blowing. So, as I mentioned before, it provides like an API-driven approach. It will give you APIs as you as a developer, so you can build your applications against those APIs instead of talking to the infrastructure that the application needs. It will give you APIs for storing and retrieving state, or emitting events, or consuming events, or accessing configurations, secrets, and a bunch of other things. And because we are abstracting things behind APIs, we can implement cross-cutting concerns behind that and best practices. And we provide, as part of the project, different implementations for different cloud providers and things that you can run locally as well. So what I did for the book is basically I had an application that it's not even close to being a hello world. It's just multiple services running with Kafka, Redis, and PostgreSQL inside the cluster. And I added Dapper into this application to show you the difference, right? Like the changes in the application that needs to be done and the advantages of doing so. Let me see if I can click here. So I don't know if you will see this, but the idea here on this diagram is that now the application, like the services of the application, will not talk directly to Kafka, but they will talk to a Dapper API that will communicate with Kafka. That basically gives you the possibility of removing Kafka and adding any other message broker in there and keep maintaining the same APIs inside the application. That gives you flexibility of moving applications across environments, and you can have different configuration for different environments if you want to, right? You can run the application on different cloud providers with different message brokers, or you can have run the application locally with a provider that works kind of like in your local machine. I think that that's really important. But also, you make the application simple because you start removing things that couple the application with the environment, like, for example, the Kafka client or the Redis client in this case, so you make your application slimmer as well. The idea of Dapper is to enable polyglot development, right? Like it's not tied to any programming language. I use Go for these examples because it's the Kubernetes community, they kind of know Go, but these examples can be written kind of like in any language. And I don't know if you can see there, but the APIs are pretty simple. It's like, okay, I want to get state from state store, or I want to save state, or I want to publish an event, right? No matter if Kafka is being used or if Google Cloud is being used in the background. And I'm running out of time, I know, Mateus, so let me just go through these tips. Again, no matter which kind of tool are you looking into, check that they provide the right interfaces. Sometimes you can clearly see that a tool, it's not giving you the right interfaces that you can abstract, or you can hook down different behavior for your custom scenario. Always ask yourself, if this project will work for local development or not, and how is your development workflow going to change whenever you choose any of these tools. And look for tools that provide ecosystems. I think that that's extremely important. In the case of Dagger and Tecton, they all have catalogs where you as a community member can share things that you already created so other people can use. Those things, I think that it's extremely important for adopting open source projects. And if you see projects that doesn't allow you to add a hook point, then you need to start wondering how on earth are you going to extend that application or that system. So takeaways, again, you need to learn how to navigate the landscape. That's the thing that you need to do. There is no escape. Working with people, I think that there is a lot of things that you can improve doing, like getting out and talking to people in conferences or just presenting what you learn in meetups. I think that that's really important. And then, learning to adapt is key for success. That's really important. You need to make sure that whatever you're using today, you can change it tomorrow without like a year of work. That's extremely important. Please check out the repository. Any questions that you might have, please feel free to contact me. And I know that I'm out of time, but on Monday, I'm doing a meetup here with the Java user group, and we will be talking about this specific project, like Dapper and Java for Java developers. I will go deep into what Dapper does and how it works in Kubernetes clusters and outside Kubernetes. And I will be presenting here with Mauricio, so you'll have a local person from Mercado Libre presenting too. Before I go, I have one book copy, and you need to answer that question. Who knows the answer to that question, what position is Dapper in the growing projects in the CNCF? Raise your hand. We have the winner there. What? There you go, 12. He won a copy. Thank you very much, folks. Any questions, please feel free to reach out. Come to say hello. I'm open to help people to get into open source as well. So thank you.